whenever I have to explore a subject, I try to really understand it from different perspectives. One is, as you said, what is its opposite? And yes, fear is indeed the opposite of courage, at least in grammatical terms. So if you were to look at fear first, right, and in a way it has become quite fashionable to talk about overcoming fear and managing fear and so on. But if you go back to our biological roots, fear has a purpose. In order for us to be cautious and not take foolhardy risks.
Wonderful.
Right? So fear itself is a survival mechanism. This is part of our evolutionary development itself. Then as time goes on, as we face threats to our survival, and when we understand that, oh, this is a threat to my survival, that is when fear arises. And fear is a stimulus for us to do something. First of all, fear itself is not a bad thing. Fear is a good thing. From a rational cognitive standpoint, one can deal with fear by trying to identify what is the real evidence rather than being swayed by the false evidence. You know that old story of you see a rope on the street and you think it's a snake kind of thing. You shine the light on it, you say, oh, it's not a snake, it's only a rope. This is a good example of false evidence appearing real. So fear is a reaction that we have to perceived threat. Now, when we have that reaction, we can make a decision of how we are going to deal with it. This is where courage comes in. So to answer your question, does fear come first or courage come first? Without question, fear comes first. Because fear is hardwired into us as a survival mechanism. It's in our autonomous nervous system. We don't even have to think about it. Boom, it happens. But to go from fear to courage requires a decision to be made. In other words, we have to go from that autonomous nervous system where things are happening automatically, where we make a choice and we make a decision of how we are going to respond. So courage is neither fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Courage is a considered decision to do something in the face of the threat and in the face of the fear. In the cancer process, I actually discovered that I am no hero. I am a coward. I faced enormous fear, enormous uncertainty, enormous vulnerability, enormous fragility, enormous insecurity. And that continues because we are wired, right? Even 20 years later, even though I'm a thriver for 20 years, when I go to my checkups, I still have butterflies in my stomach in anticipation of what could happen, right? So, but I realized not only through the cancer journey, but even otherwise, that in order to, as they say, if you have to deal with fear and you have to find those resources of courage, then you have to go to a state which is beneath fear. And that state is what we call the state of presence. And that state is when your neurological activity shifts away from the limbic brain, the amygdala, to the logical, rational brain, which is the prefrontal neocortex. But in order to do that, you have to change your internal state. And so what I learned actually is not courage. I learned presence. So all the things that I was learning. And then courage is one of those actions that you can take, is one of those decisions you can make, is one of those choices you can make. So even then, if you think about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, if you do it from a state of presence, you're doing it consciously. You can say, no, I'm going to take this on. This is a conflict worth having, but I'm doing it now from a state of presence with my eyes open and my heart open, rather than from a reactive or an impulsive state. So fear is the opposite. We need to understand fear. And then courage is that deeper underlying state which we also need to understand, from which courage can arise. By the way, it's the state from which clarity also arises. It's connected to clarity through the capacity of discernment. Your sense of discernment or discrimination, viveka in the Indian tradition, that vivek allows you to arrive at clarity. And so same thing is true with courage. So for me, courage is a capacity that emerges from the state of presence, just like clarity is a capacity that emerges from the state of presence. So the real secret or the real key is presence. The last thing I want to say is that I read many years ago that the word courage, the etymology of the word courage is cœur, C-O-E-U-R, the French word for heart. Courage springs from having that stout heart. And it's embedded in the word itself. And that is perhaps why courage is a little bit hard, because we don't know how to access those resources that are present to us in that stout heart, in that fierce heart that each one of us actually has. We have the remote control to our internal state, but we don't know how to use it. And really, for me, the breakthrough was to be able to make myself present. Do I succeed 100% of the time? Absolutely not. Because this is conditioning where I'm trying to overlay the hard wiring. Right? This is very difficult to do. But it is possible to get better and better and better at it. And so in our work, for example, we have created something called a presence practice, so that you don't have to try and figure it out on your own. And we have brought it together using wisdom from different traditions around the world. It takes only 13 minutes to do the practice. But if you do the practice regularly, you become familiar with the process, and you also become familiar with that state of presence, which is unique. Nobody can describe it to you. And when you do experience it, and when you realize that all it takes is for me to use the remote control that I have, empowers you and liberates you. That's what it did for me. That's why I've become such a proponent and advocate of saying, look, you can change your internal state, and from that internal state, all those capacities that you're looking for can emerge. And so what we as coaches can do is to help them to find that state of presence, not only through teaching them the practice, but by also modeling presence ourselves. Because presence is an energetic quality. Presence has the ability to induct people into that state. Right. So one of the barriers to presence is when we start to become very defensive. Right? We go to a place where we are not just defending, which is okay, but we start becoming defensive. And we all know this with the people we interact with, right? There is a moment at which people start to become defensive rather than defending a point of view. Then I know, oh, I'm losing presence. So that is one quality. The second quality is that if I start becoming pushy, I know I'm losing my presence. So if you go to a shop and the salesman is actually helping you select, and he's promoting the values of one product over another, that's fine. But when he starts becoming pushy, I don't feel good about it, right? And so, as we say, nothing to defend. And the barrier to presence is defensiveness. Nothing to promote. The barrier to that is becoming pushy. And the third one, which we've discussed, is nothing to fear. Because you see, as we said, courage is a choice to face the threat or face the uncertainty. So as a coach, I know that if I'm going to go to those deep and dark places, I don't know what the outcome will be. I don't know what the implication will be. I don't know if I'll be able to deal with what comes up. I don't know if my client is going to actually not have a good experience from this. I don't know any of those things. And yet I know there is a knot there. And if I have to help the client disentangle that knot, I have to go there. I can't not go there. The energy and the body language changes. That to me is the main thing. For example, some people may, let's say, some people who have a tendency to talk quite a lot might suddenly become reflective. Okay, and then if you honor that silence in which the gears are clicking and something is happening, then that is a moment where something has shifted or is shifting. And then you can, as a good coach, you can probe and ask and wonder what's going on, right? It may be the opposite. In some cases, somebody who has been a bit sullen and a bit withdrawn may suddenly start to bubble up with new ideas, new thoughts, what ifs, speculation, right? And you see that, okay, the energy here has shifted, the body language here has shifted, right? Some people will ask you to say, hold on, you said something, can you please repeat that? Because that was meaningful for me. And then you can be sensitive to that and you can follow that path. In some cases, somebody may tear up, which happened to me recently in a conversation, which was not intended to be a coaching conversation, but turned out to be a coaching conversation, as many things do these days. And a very senior executive, entrepreneur, etc., just stopped. They said, I'm not speaking because I'm feeling tears. This is not telling you exactly what the shift is. That you have to probe as a coach. And you've got to allow the person to be able to make sense of that own shift by asking some good questions. But to me, the shift happens energetically in the moment. That is one kind of shift. And the second kind of shift is when you as a coach give your client some homework to do or some journaling to be done or some observations to be made in their workplace or at home or whatever. And then they come back in the next session and with this kind of excitement and say, you know what, I noticed that this framework really worked, or, this framework really flopped, or whatever it is, right? So when they come back and tell you about their experience, again, with that slightly different kind of energy, to me is a signal that this shift has taken place. I think coaches are encouraged to be far too neutral and far too objective for their good and for the client's good.
Yeah.
I think that coaches need to be, as they say, 100% subjective and 100% objective at the same time. This is very hard. We call our cancer coaches Sherpas. Or, in other cultures, if you don't know the meaning of Sherpa, you can even say lifeguard. Right? Now, a lifeguard's job is to sit on the beach and notice what may be going wrong. But when something is going wrong, he has to be able to dive in. Similarly, with the Sherpa is with you on the mountain, carrying your load, showing you the way. He's not telling you on the GPS or on the mobile phone. The Sherpa is not interested in climbing the mountain for you. You have to do the summit. The Sherpa's job is to help you, but be there on the way. And if he thinks that the weather is changing, it's his job to tell you that, look, the weather is changing. So my view, having done coaching both in the corporate world, with individuals, with cancer, with stress, well-being, etc., is that this sweet spot to strike is the difference between, conscious competence and unconscious competence. This happens over time. Clarity, courage, and confidence are so deeply interlinked that in some cases it's useful to think of them as separate and to divide them and to understand them individually. But it's very hard to say which comes first and which comes second and which leads to what and so on. My go-to place is always the state beneath all of that, which is presence. Coaches also need to constantly work on themselves. And it's not just about coaching supervision. That's one kind of working on yourself. And even that is, in my view, not adequately done. Coaching supervision is very important because it's so easy for us to lose our skills or lose our presence or lose our process in the midst of our session. And if somebody else is observing and giving us good feedback, then we can improve. So that is one part of it. But the second part of it is, I think, the deeper thing, which is that is the coach actually working on his or her own growth and evolution as a person, not just as a coach. We like to say to clients that the leader you are is the person you are. Well, the same thing applies to coaches. The coach you are is the person you are. I found that the best way for me to do it was through a master-apprentice relationship rather than a supervisor-supervisee relationship.
Thank you so much, Vijay. And thank you for this. And thank you for also offering to be the first speaker on the series.
My pleasure. Thanks. Thank you both.
Thank you for that, Vijay. Take care.